Warning. This podcast may prove to be damaging to the comfort of closely held presuppositions. Remember to practice Acts 17:11 and examine the scriptures daily to see whether these things are so.
The world is changing rapidly. Wars and rumors of wars are abundant. Civil unrest, economic collapse, a global economic reset, natural disasters, and the second coming of Jesus Christ is on the horizon. Are you prepared? Welcome to Truth Fed.
Greetings, truth seekers, and welcome back to Truth Fed. Today is Monday, April 6, 2015. The website is truthfed.com, and I'm your host, Sean. And I hope you all had a great and wonderful Passover weekend, and I hope you had a chance to reflect on the most important event in history, Jesus Christ being pierced for our transgressions and then rising from the dead, having the keys of death and Hades. And I thought it would be fitting to read quickly the prophecy of Isaiah 53 concerning our Lord, Yeshua, the Christ. And so let me just do that real fast, and then we'll get on with the rest of the show. But in Isaiah 53, it says, "Who has believed our report? And to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? For he shall grow up before him as a tender plant, as a root out of dry ground. He has no form or comeliness, and when he has seen him, there is no beauty that we should desire him. He is despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And we hid, as it were, our faces from him. He was despised, and we did not esteem him. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we esteem him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. But he was wounded for our transgressions, he was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was upon him, and by his stripes we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned every one to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed, and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. He was led as a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before its shears is silent, so he opened not his mouth. He was taken from prison and from judgment. And who will declare his generation? For he was cut off from the land of the living. For transgressions of my people he was stricken, and they made his grave with the wicked, but with the rich at his death. Because he had done no violence, nor was any deceit in his mouth. Yet it pleased the Lord to bruise him. He was put him to grief. When you make his soul an offering for sins, he shall see his seed, and he shall prolong his days, and the pleasure of the Lord shall prosper in his hand. He shall see the labor of his soul, and be steadfast, and be satisfied. By his knowledge my righteous servant shall justify many, for he shall bear their iniquities. Therefore I will divide him a portion with the great, and he shall divide the spoil with the strong, because he poured out his soul unto death, and he was numbered with the transgressors. And he bore the sin of many, and made an intercession for the transgressors." That prophecy right there, as I'm reading it, I'm just thinking of all these parts being fulfilled. And it's just incredible. And I don't see how anybody can read that prophecy. I don't understand how the Jewish people can read that prophecy and deny Jesus as their Messiah. I mean, he met every one of these. It's just amazing. And I think this is one of the things that for me really just nails it down, that our God is the one true God, because who can dare predict the future? And I'm sorry, folks, you can't make this stuff up several hundred years in advance and then have a guy go and fulfill it perfectly. You just can't do it. It's out of the human realm to do such things. The Word of God is most definitely inspired by Him. And we can have that conversation another time, but I just really wanted to read that, and hopefully it blessed you, and hopefully some things jumped out to you that maybe you never caught before. But that prophecy, man, just really to a T, is just amazing. Before we move on, I came across this article titled "How Jesus Died for You." And I think sometimes because of the movies and the stories, and that we hear it over and over, and, the Christianese and somewhat, that we have somehow lost just what kind of suffering our Lord went through. And I wanted to share with you this morning this article, and then if we have time, I'll read some headlines and talk about a few other topics. But it says, "How Jesus Died for You. Read 55 amazing facts on Jesus' death." Because, we see the movies and we see all these things, and we don't really understand the suffering that takes place upon the cross. And how being crucified, just how extremely terrible that is. And so I wanted to read this for you, not to, because I think it's important to have an understanding of what He went through on your behalf. It's hard to appreciate something that you don't really conceive. And so I thought that it would just be fitting to share this with you. Below says, are the facts on how Jesus died for you. I do not think that we really understand how much Jesus did for us. Please share this post and spread the good news of Jesus. And I shared it on my Facebook, so some of you may have seen it, but I'm just going to go ahead and read it. Crucifixion was invented by the Persians in 300 BC. Oh, by the way, several hundred years before that, David prophesied that our Lord would be crucified before crucifixion was even invented. You should go check that out in the Psalms sometime and do that research. But crucifixion was invented by the Persians in 300 BC and perfected by the Romans in 100 BC. It is the most painful death ever invented by man, and it is where we get the term excruciating. It was reserved primarily for the most vicious of male criminals. Jesus was stripped naked and his clothes divided by the Roman guards. By the way, one of the most humiliating things and thing, when the Jews were in the Holocaust, the Germans, the Nazis, would strip them naked because it just defeats you to be stripped naked. That's like an old torture that people don't really think about, but when you're stripped naked, you become so vulnerable. So just that in itself, just imagine that you're in front of a crowd and they strip you naked, okay? And they've beaten you to the point where you're unrecognizable. Do you understand the suffering that he went through before he even got put on this cross? So Jesus was stripped naked, and his clothes was divided by the Roman guards, fulfilling Psalms 22:18. They divide my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. Another prophecy fulfilled, that's obvious. The crucifixion of Jesus guaranteed a horrific, slow, and painful death. Jesus' knees were flexed at about 45 degrees, and he was forced to bear his weight with the muscles of his thighs, which is not an anatomical position which is possible to maintain for more than a few minutes without severe cramp and muscles of the thigh and calf. Most of the pictures you see, his legs are straight out. No, they would have been bent at like an angle, forcing him to put all of his weight on that, which after just a minute or two would have created severe cramps, is what this is pointing out. Jesus' weight was borne on his feet with nails driven through them. As the strength of muscles of Jesus' lower limbs tired, the weight of his body had to be transferred to his wrist and his arms and his shoulders. Within a few minutes of being placed on the cross, Jesus' shoulders would have dislocated. Minutes later, Jesus' elbows and wrist became dislocated. The results of upper limb dislocation is that his arms were 9 inches longer than normal, as clearly shown on the shroud. In addition, prophecy was fulfilled in Psalm 22:14. Here we have another prophecy. I am poured out like water, and all of my bones are out of joint. After Jesus' wrist, elbows, and shoulders were dislocated, the weight of his body and his upper limbs caused traction forces on the pectorals, major muscles of his chest wall. These traction forces caused his rib cage to be pulled upwards and outwards in the most unnatural state. His chest wall was permanently in a position of maximal respiratory inspiration. In order to exhale, Jesus was psychologically required to force his body. In order to breathe out, Jesus had to push down on the nails in his feet to raise his body and allow his rib cage to move downwards and inwards expire air from his lungs. His lungs were in a resting position of constant maximum inspiration. Crucifixion is a medical catastrophe. The problem was that Jesus could not easily push down on the nails in his feet because the muscles of his legs, bent at a 45 degree, were extremely fatigued and severely cramped, and in an anatomically compressed position. Unlike all Hollywood movies about the crucifixion, the victim was extremely active. The crucified victim was psychologically forced to move up and down on the cross, physically forced to move up and down on the cross, a distance of about 12 inches, in order to breathe. The process of respiration caused excruciating pain, mixed with the absolute terror of suffocating. As the 6 hours of the crucifixion wore on, oh my gosh, can you imagine 6 hours? That is unbelievable. Just horrible. Jesus was less and less able to bear his weight on his legs, and as his thigh and calf muscles became increasingly exhausted, there was increasing dislocation of his wrist, elbows, shoulders, and further elevation of his chest wall. I mean, imagine literally it feels like your arms are being pulled apart, on top of the fact that your legs are so cramped you can hardly deal with it, on top of the fact you have holes in your feet and in your wrist, on top of the fact that you're desperate to try to breathe, kind of like when you think you're drowning. Making his breathing more and more difficult, within minutes of the crucifixion, Jesus became severely short of breath. His movements up and down the cross to breathe caused excruciating pain in his wrists and his feet and his dislocated elbows and shoulders. The movement became less frequent as Jesus became increasingly exhausted, but the terror of imminent death by asphyxiation forced him to continue in his efforts to breathe. Jesus' lower limb muscles developed excruciating cramp from the effort of pushing down on his legs to raise his body so that he could breathe out. The pain from his two shattered median nerves and his wrists exploded with every movement. Jesus was covered in blood and sweat. The blood was a result of scourging that nearly killed him, and the sweat as a result of his violent, involuntary attempts to effort to expire air from his lungs. Throughout all this, he was completely naked, and the leaders of the Jews and the crowds and the thieves of both sides of him were jeering, swearing, and laughing at him. In addition, Jesus' own mother was watching. Imagine watching your child go through that. Physiologically, Jesus' body was undergoing a series of catastrophic and terminal events. Because Jesus could not maintain adequate ventilation of his lungs, he was now in a state of hypoventilation. His blood oxygen level began to fall, and he developed hypoxia, low blood oxygen. In addition, because of his restricted respiratory movements, his blood carbon dioxide, CO2 level, began to rise, a condition known as hypercritical. This rising CO2 level stimulated his heart to beat faster in order to increase the delivery of oxygen and removal of CO2. The respiratory center in Jesus' brain sent urgent messages to his lungs to breathe faster, and Jesus began to pant. Jesus' physiologically reflexes demanded that he took deeper breaths, and he voluntarily moved up and down on the cross much faster. Despite the excruciating pain, the agonizing movements spontaneously started several times a minute to delight the crowd who jeered him, the Roman soldiers, and a Sanhedrin. However, due to nailing of the cross and his increasing exhaustion, he was unable to provide more oxygen to his oxygen-starved body. The twin forces of hypoxia, too little oxygen, and capnia, too much CO2, caused his heart to beat faster and faster, and Jesus developed tachycardia. Jesus' heart beat faster and faster, and his pulse rate was probably about 220 beats a minute maximum, normally sustainable. Jesus had drunk nothing for 15 hours since 6 p.m. the previous evening. Jesus had entered a scourging which nearly killed him. He was bleeding from all over his body following the scourging, the crown of thorns, the nails in his wrist and his feet, and lacerations following the beating and the falls. Jesus was already very dehydrated, and his blood pressure fell alarmingly. His blood pressure was probably about 80/50. He was a first-degree shock with hypovolemia, low blood pressure volume, tachycardia, increasingly fast heart rate, hypophonemia, increasingly fast respiratory rate, and hypohidrosis, excessive sweating. By about noon, Jesus' heart was probably beginning to fail. Jesus' lungs probably began to fill up with pulmonary edema. This only served to exasperate his breathing, which was already severely compromised. Jesus was in heart failure and respiratory failure. Jesus said, "I thirst," because his body was crying out for fluids. Jesus was in desperate need of an intravenous infusion of blood and plasma to save his life. Jesus could not breathe properly and was slowly suffocating to death. At this stage, Jesus probably developed a hypercardium. Plasma and blood gathered in a space around his heart called the persidium. This fluid around his heart caused cardiac tamponade, fluid around his heart which prevented Jesus' heart from beating properly. Because of the increasing physiological demands on Jesus' heart and the advanced state of hypercardium, Jesus probably eventually sustained a cardiac rupture. His heart literally burst. This was probably the cause of his death. To slow the process of death, the soldiers put a small wooden seat on the cross, which would allow Jesus the privilege of bearing his weight on this sacrum. The effect of this was that it could take up to 9 days to die on a cross. When the Romans wanted to expedite death, they would simply break the legs of the victims, causing the victims to suffocate in a matter of minutes. This was called Crucifixion. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Jesus said, "Tetelestai," meaning, "It is finished." At the moment he gave up his spirit, and he died. When the soldiers came to Jesus to break his legs, he was already dead, but not a bone of his body was broken in fulfillment of prophecy. Jesus died after 6 hours of the most excruciating and terrifying torture ever invented. Jesus died so that ordinary people like you and me could go to heaven. All he asks is that you love him, your Lord, your God, with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind. Can't you even do this for him? I thought that, and I apologize that I was probably, butchering some of those medical terms, but I think that puts it in perspective of just how terrible this actually was. And I think we lose sight of what he actually went through. And even Passion of the Christ doesn't quite give you, while it does give you a decent visual, it still doesn't quite, show you, give it to you like this article did. And so this article I shared on Facebook, and you're welcome to share it with other people. But I thought today we should all just understand and know what the Lord had to do in order to save you from your own wickedness. And, just how much we owe him. And I think that while we intellectually understand this and we know this, sometimes I think it's lost on our heart because we just can't quite fathom. We just can't quite fathom what he went through. And I'm just amazed by all the prophecy and everything that's clearly fulfilled concerning Jesus. Speaking of prophecy being fulfilled, we have what I believe is unquestionable, seen Bible prophecy fulfilled right before our eyes over the past 2 weeks, which is the prophecy of Joel 2:30-31. And I will show wonders in the heavens and in the earth, blood and fire, and pillars of smoke. The sun shall be turned into darkness, and the moon into blood, before the coming of the great and awesome day of the Lord. And I think the great and terrible day of the Lord is about to begin, because I think that we clearly had the sun turn darkened, and we just had our blood moon, a few days later, which some of you may have been able to see on Saturday morning. I also believe that the great Net Chetef, or snatching away, or literally means kidnapping, which is the word used when Paul describes the gathering of the saints into the clouds, is on the very near horizon also. I think the world is getting so dark, and some shocking things are happening around the world. And I think some shocking things are about to come to a city near you as well. You can believe that. And I thought we could just take a few minutes to read just some headlines from this week. Just from this week, my friends. And we also have an incredible amount of natural disasters and weather type stuff happening. And if you get a chance, go to truthfed.com and watch the main featured video at the very top of the page. Just amazing what's going on around the world. Man, I'm just amazed by some of these things going on. I can't believe people aren't that people just don't get it. I just don't understand. Also, real quick before I get into some of these headlines, and then we'll wrap up the show. I think this is likely going to be the only podcast this week. I might get another one out, but it's unlikely. I just won't have much extra free time this week. So I just wanted to warn you up front about that. Also, I'm hoping, and I'm going to try, no promises, but I'm going to try to get this month's video created and released sometime this week for the Patreon subscribers. You can become a Patreon, by the way, by going to truthfed.com/help. And also, if you go to truthfed.com and follow me on Facebook, I post several videos that I find from around the web and around the world nearly every day. So even if I don't get a chance to create any content this week, if you're following me, then you will still be getting content to consume every single day related to end times and to the return of Christ. So I encourage you to do that. So let's just look at some of these headlines that I pulled out today that I thought just kind of reveal just where we are in this country. First headline I thought was interesting was shortest lunar eclipse of the century delights millions. It delights millions. Millions of skywalkers around the globe admired the blood moon and what is the shortest lunar eclipse of the century. By the way, this is what the topic I'm going to try to talk about on the video that goes out to Patreon to subscribers, is just the significance of this particular blood moon and some interesting facts that follow it. But, I just think it's interesting that people look at this as like, ooh, it's so delightful. It's, just a kind of a neat thing to watch. The majority of people just have no idea that this is a warning. This is a warning, folks. This is not something to go out and go, oh, it's so pretty. This is something to go, oh, we're in trouble. It's the correct reaction, but of course, not the reaction we're going to get. Next headline, Russian analyst calls for nuclear attack on Yellowstone Park. Oh, man. How many prophecies have we read on this show where people say they've had dreams and visions of the United States being nuked by Russia? And how many times in headlines on a regular basis is there some type of Russian political leader or Putin himself saying they're going to use nukes? I mean, they just keep saying it over and over, and I have a feeling eventually they're going to do it. Russian analyst calls for nuclear attack on Yellowstone National Park. The consequences would be catastrophic for the United States. Geologists believe that Yellowstone supervolcano could explode at any minute. There are signs of a growing activity there. Therefore, it suffices to push the relatively small, for example, the impact of a munition megaton class to initiate an eruption. The consequences will be catastrophic for the United States. A country just disappears, he said. Oh, man. And I'm not going to try to pronounce his name, but Russian geopolitical analyst has called for Moscow to launch a nuclear attack on Yellowstone Park and the San Andreas fault line. By the way, have you seen the trailer for the movie San Andreas fault? Dude, I'm telling you, some of the stuff that we see in the movies right now, it's prophetic. But this guy says, hey, we need to nuke the San Andreas fault line and Yellowstone National Park, noting that the devastating consequences would disappear the United States as a country. I think that there's prophecy from many godly men, anointed men and women. We also have the Babylonian prophecy in Revelation that I believe is describing the same things. Speaking of nukes, if this page will refresh, we've got these nuke talks that continue to go on with Iran. Netanyahu continues to warn that this will be too dangerous for Israel and they will have to react. Obama calls Iran nuke deal a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. He just did a speech talking about how somehow this nuke deal with Iran's going to make us safer, even though every day it seems like they're on the streets with signs saying death to the United States. Anybody else find that incredibly strange and like, what in the world? By giving the number one terrorist supporter in the world nuclear weapons is somehow going to make the United States safer, and this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity? That's according to our leaders. Then we had the slaughter of Christians. Another slaughter of Christians is happening all over the world, all over the time. Of course, it's not repeated by, or really spoken much about on the mainstream media because they're not interested in sharing with you this kind of truth. Christians hunted down as al-Shabaab kill 147 of them in Kenya. Folks, we need to be praying and interceding for these people. Lord God, have mercy on them. If you were a Christian, you were shot on the spot. With each blast of a gun, I thought I was going to die. At least 147 people have been killed, 79 wounded in Thursday's attack on Kenya University. Basically, they go into a school and they ask the students, there's 500 students there, are you a Christian or are you a Muslim? If you said Christian, you were shot and killed on the spot. There was a Kenyan survivor found hiding in a wardrobe for 2 days. He was in there for 2 days praying. A survivor of a massacre at Garcia University College in Kenya was found on Saturday, 2 days after the al-Shabaab extremists slaughtered 148 people. Cynthia, 19 years old, had cowered in a wardrobe for 2 days. The student was finally coaxed from her hiding place in deep shock. She had covered herself with clothes, and she drank a bottle of lotion to stave off hunger and thirst. Do you understand the kind of suffering that's going on around the world? That's why I hate it, this mentality that Christians aren't, that we're never going to have to take any, we're not going to have to go through any great tribulation or tribulation. And the rapture may happen before the great tribulation starts, and I believe that it very well could. But don't think for a second that, I say this a lot, don't be so arrogant as to think that we here in the West just get to escape. And we may, but I just highly doubt it. I just highly doubt it that we all just get to escape any type of persecution. I mean, God's people are being martyred around the world by the hundreds, by the thousands, in horrific ways. This poor girl was so traumatized by what she saw and heard that she hid in a closet for 2 days eating lotion. God help her. Speaking of the United States, I've been warning about this. You can go back and find videos of me warning about this almost 2 years ago, that there's a massive drought in California that's going to continue to get worse, and the end result is going to be there's no water. There's no water. And then the end result is going to be food shortages. People blew it off. You should go to some of these videos and look at some of the comments. People just calling me a fear monger and blah, blah, blah. Well, now the governor, Jerry Brown, California is to be heavily fined, Californians, to be heavily fined for long showers. It's getting to the point where people are going to pay fines for taking a shower. They have no water, folks. And over half of our fruits, vegetables, our produce, our nuts come from California. So if you don't think there's going to be a huge hike in food prices, and if you don't think there's going to be food shortages, you're kidding yourself. Famine is coming around the world, folks. We know this because the book of Revelation tells us that there's going to be famines. There's going to be pestilence. They're finding these huge termites, this new breed of termites, this new hybrid breed of termites that are apparently in the billions numbered in Florida that are just wreaking havoc on things. Listen, the pestilence, the starvation, the natural disasters, all of this stuff is here, and it's just progressively getting worse. It's already here. We're having innumerable amount of earthquakes like never before. People say, well, this stuff's always been going on. Not at this kind of a rate. The increase in earthquakes and stuff is mind-boggling. The strange natural disasters are mind-boggling. Have you seen all the sinkholes? There's videos of sinkholes every day swallowing people's cars as they're driving down the road, swallowing school buses. You really think all this is normal? People actually think that all this is normal, that all this has always happened? Oh, this has always happened. You're off your rocker and you're in complete and utter denial. But I guess we shouldn't be surprised by this. Also, by the way, they restarted CERN on Easter, on Sunday. So that's fired up and going again. I'm just amazed by all the things going on. And we need to wake up, people, folks. Share this information with as many people as you can. Show them that, like I said, follow me on Facebook and just share the videos with them. You don't even have to say anything. Just share these videos that I share. They're mind-blowing, some of the things. I don't see how anybody can look at them and not see the times we are living in. We're in it. This is the last days. You're living in it. You are the generation, folks. There is no more time. The return of Christ is on the horizon. The wrath of God is also on the horizon. I think it's already upon us. A judgment is clearly already in this country. It's clearly on California already and other states in this country. The very leaders that we have that continue to destroy our nation are a judgment upon us. Our religious freedoms are being taken every day. And then perversion and wickedness is celebrated and murder is celebrated. But righteousness and walking upright, that's condemned. I thought I would end with this interesting note. All these things are going on in this country. You know them. You hear them in the headlines. Things going on around the world. I mean, it's just incredible. But the average American doesn't get too upset about it. Doesn't want to fret about it. Doesn't want to, nobody's going to pour into the streets and demand change or anything like that, right? But by golly, if the Kentucky Wildcats get beat in the Final Four, people pour out into the streets and start rioting and setting things on fire, which is what they did in Lexington. What's funny is if you listen to the show, you know that I love college basketball. Played a lot of basketball in school. I still play as an adult with some people from church, and I've just always enjoyed the game of basketball. And so I watched the tournament, but I've been rooting for Kentucky to lose, mostly because they're, I feel, I'm not even going to go into why I wanted them to lose. I just wanted them to lose. And I told my wife, I said, you watch, they're going to lose tonight, and people will literally riot. And sure enough, the next morning, I looked up Twitter, and here are the images of people burning stuff in the streets, people getting arrested, they're throwing beer bottles, literally riots. I mean, it's just riots. Rioting. Not because of the injustice going on in this country, not because of the things going on around the world, not because of the slaughter of our brothers and sisters in Christ around the world. No, because their favorite basketball team lost. That, for them, that's the United States of America right there. Nobody's going to pour out in the streets for anything that matters, but by golly, Kentucky Wildcats get beat. People are going to get in the street, and they're going to set couches on fire. They're going to throw beer bottles. They're going to attack police, and they're going to riot. The wickedness of this country, and really around the world. I mean, we're reading every day about Christians being slaughtered in Africa and in the Middle East. People being slaughtered, not just Christians. The darkness that's over this planet is so thick and so obvious. I don't understand how people can't see it, but they can't. We need to be praying and interceding on their behalf. That's the show for today. I just thought it would be a good time to just share with you what Christ actually did for you physically, like what he went through. I thought it'd be a good time to point out that I think we just saw prophecy fulfilled with the solar eclipse and the blood moon and what we can expect to come. I'm going to try to do a video on that for those of you who are Patreon subscribers. I'll try to get that out this week. No promises. Like I said, this is a busy week for me, but I'm going to try my best. And I thought it would be good to just read some headlines just to point out the condition that we're in. Hope that this show has blessed you. If it has, send me an email, sean@truthfed.com. Again, if you want to support the mission, you can do that, truthfed.com/help. Go to truthfed.com, watch that video on some of the natural disasters going on. It's amazing. And follow me on Facebook. I'm going to be I share videos all day long on that thing. And so it'd be a great way for you to stay up on what's going on. And to, if you're a watchman, it's a great way to keep up. So thanks for listening. I'm Sean with truthfed.com. Peace and grace be with you. God bless.